interviewing Helen Boardman on July 11th, 1988, in her home in Park La Brea. It's Elizabeth McBroom interviewing. And the first thing I'd like to ask you, Helen, have you been interviewed before about your career for any other oral history enterprise?
Not for anything connected to this.
Mm-hmm.
I was interviewed by Patty Wheat for the History of Parents Anonymous, which was then published in Hope for the Children.
Hope for the Children. That wasn't on tape, as far as you know.
It's in a paperback.
But I mean the interview itself.
The interview itself was taped.
Was taped. And so far as you know, would that be available to us? To these archives?
I don't know. Patty is moved to Kentucky, so I really don't know.
Are you in contact with her?
Well, occasionally, rarely.
Yeah, we could follow through on that if we
Right.
wanted to and correspond with her and inquire
But
about
I have
that
the book.
tape. You have the book. I'm
Right.
going to ask you at the end about any documents that you have and so on. That's good. Now, first thing, just to kind of get us started, I always like to know how people got into the profession in the beginning. What was your path into social work, Helen?
Well, role models. My maternal grandfather was a circuit riding Methodist minister in a small town, villages really in western Washington. But he must have made an impact on people because on his 80th birthday he got over 500 birthday cards from around people that he'd helped. Then my mother said that after she graduated from college, when she left college in the 1890s, if she hadn't gotten married, she would have gone into some kind of counseling work, which she continued to do throughout her life with people coming in, bringing their problems to her. So when I was trying to decide what to do, it was a kind of normal path to follow.
And so you were really decided all your life that you were going to be a social worker and pursued that in a straight path? Well,
not exactly. I had problems when I was in college deciding what to do. My father wanted me to major in music, but anyway, I chose social work in college. Arlien Johnson was my first teacher in social work at the University of Washington. She had a master's degree, and you may not believe this, but in her classes, she took so long to communicate and would look out the window and think, and you'd think she lost her way. So that when I saw her 3 or 4 years later, when she was defending her dissertation at the University of Chicago, I could believe it was the same person, this dynamic person from the time in college.
You had some undergraduate work in social work at Washington and went on for graduate work at the University of Chicago.
Later.
You worked in between.
Yes. When I graduated from college in 1928, the economy was pretty good then. But social work, the jobs in social work were practically nil. Incidentally, in that connection, Arlene, in 1927, had the head of the Social Welfare League in Seattle, eventually the Family Service, was called the Family Service, was Ruth Fitzsimons, whom you know.
Yes, I know her.
Come to talk to us, and she told us that no one should go into social work unless they had a supplemental income, that the most we could expect to earn in social work was $90 a month, and that would be when we'd reached,
the
top. And when I graduated in 1928, the only job that I could find was in a settlement house in Tacoma that paid board and room and $40 a month. Now, although I believe that people should go into social work who want to give service, I didn't do it. And I taught school for a year. Then I went to the Red Cross in Seattle for 2 years, and then went to the University of Chicago.
And you got your master's degree from Social Service Administration.
I had a year, and I went in 31 for 6 months and had to return home because my mother wasn't expected to live, but she got better. And I went back in 34 and spent the year in 1934 at the University of Chicago. And then my mother really became terminal, and I went home, and I never went back to defend my thesis. So I didn't actually get the degree, but I had the coursework.
You finished all the requirements.
Right.
Helen, can you sort of give an account of the different jobs that you have had, the positions during your career?
Well, from 34, I was till 41. I worked in various capacities for the State Welfare Department in the state of Washington, various jobs. Co-administrator in Grays Harbor County, medical social worker in Bellingham, head of the social service department at Pierce County Hospital in Tacoma. I moved around. Then, when we got married and came down here, Arlien had suggested I apply, and I'm sure she helped at the Children's Hospital. So I started there.
Your interest had been in medical social work. I remember you at Billings in Chicago.
Right. With Ruth Emerson as my supervisor. And then I started work there February 5th of 1941 and retired July 1st of 1972, some 31 and a half years later.
So you don't have very many different jobs to account for.
Here.
You were no fly-by-night.
I was a fly-by-night from 29 to 41. I mean, 2 years was the longest I was on a job.
Tell about how you saw the profession develop in those 31 years of your service at Children's Hospital here.
Here.
Mm-hmm.
The social work profession.
Mm-hmm.
Or
the social work profession.
Well, first, during the Depression, as you know, many people came into social work. In contrast to 1928, by 1933, about the only jobs that were available or paid money were in social work. so there was a great influx of people into social work.
You saw the job market and it really turned upside down.
Did it ever. And remuneration changed markedly too. Didn't compete with many other professions, but it was adequate.
Began to pay a living wage.
Right. Then what I began to see happen was more interest in the private practice, which could pay more money, and a less.
When did you begin to see that, Helen?
Right after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I really did.
Mm-hmm.
It was when the private practice began to flourish. And also there was a lessening of interest in where social work had started, which was serving the poor, basically. And so there was this great expanse of social work into private practice, into industrial settings, a great many different areas where social workers, into which social workers moved, and leaving a big hole, from my point of view, in the service to where we started.
Did it mean that it was difficult to recruit good social workers to staff then?
Was it? Yes, indeed.
Uh-huh.
Very difficult. And particularly, we would get very upset, although I was in a hospital setting, which the majority of our services were to the poor. I'm using poor in a generic kind of way. The people that we had to work with in the county hospitals, in the children's services, in all these other areas, were the less qualified and had less background for service, and it was very frustrating to those of us who were trying to coordinate services with children's services and to county hospitals and so forth, that they were having such a terrible time. Now, in the course of this, I have a confession to make. That is that one of the people who had worked for the county and who got a grant to go back to SC to get her degree in social work, and she got her degree, but she could not bear to go back and work in that bureaucracy. And she came to me, and I was upset at her wanting to move, but she said, I'm not going back there, and I have the alternative of repaying the money to the county for the amount that was given me. And I employed her. So in a way, I contributed to this.
You were able to attract staff because they could really practice more as professionals than they could in the county bureaucracy.
Right.
Uh-huh.
But I had trouble, too, getting staff. One of the problems was there was always development of positions for social work. The schools weren't able to turn them out fast enough with a master's degree. And if you set up a master's degree as your basic criteria, and then the schools aren't providing them fast enough,
Did you usually have the master's as an entry requirement at children's?
Well, after I came, it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did the department grow during those 31 years. Could you tell something about that? I'm sure the hospital and the department grew.
Goodness, when I went there, there were, I think there were 6 social workers. But then there were, in the development of these problems, this is another, I'm going off in a different direction here, but in the process of development of social work, with this private practice, etc., there were all these specializations developing, so that within the hospital, the people who went into this psychiatric department insisted upon having their own department, and in mental retardation, their own department. This was very disturbing to me, who believed that the criteria should not be what roof you were under, but the basic kind of service you were giving, and that in essence the differences were related to how you related to the administration of that particular unit. This also went into the whole field of social work, not just children's hospitals.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many, I really don't know how many people, how many social workers there were when I left, because they kept splitting off. At one point I got into trouble with the Children's Bureau, United States Children's Bureau.
Tell about that.
Oh, no, it's too complicated.
Well, it would be interesting maybe for these archives,
Well, the head of the mental retardation service wanted control of the social workers in that department. And he had put in a grant request, and anyway, this is embarrassing because he lied to me, and he got some support within the administration for the lie that the Children's Bureau said they wouldn't provide the money for the grant unless it was under his direction. Well, by that time, I was very concerned by what was happening in the whole field of social work, with all these different units all trying to serve one family. If you had one child with mental retardation, and that person had a social worker, you had another child with heart disease, and that one had a social worker, and you had another one in the psychiatric unit, each with a social worker, that this was incredible, and a complete reversal of all the things going back to the White House conference in 1928, etc.
Right.
And so I sat down and wrote to the United States Children's Bureau protesting this decision that the department had to be separate, that the social workers had to be separate. And when they came out to interview, they said they'd never said such a thing to the head of the mental retardation service. But in the meantime, there was a great to-do going on because the grant was threatened by my having written this letter. So I got called to a big meeting with the head of the medical service. There were about 10 people there, But fortunately for me, one of the men who'd been in the meeting where I'd been told this said, well, he and the administrator had both known that wasn't true. So I didn't get fired. It turned on, why did they lie to me? That was the question. Yeah. So anyway, that was that. But I had a principle and I was going to stand up for it. And I did. But anyway, it's embarrassing to think about it. But
what has been the outcome of that by this time? Is it still fragmented?
Well, when before I left, the administration there were other problems, competing problems with the people in the psychiatric service demanding more pay, more benefits, this kind of thing. And, there was this competition, which always has bothered me, because I thought we were there to serve people and not to fight each other. Mm-hmm. But administration had come to that point. And by that time, I'd had enough problems with the head of the psychiatric service, etc., that I said I hoped they would combine them and combine all the social workers in one unit, but not while I was there. I was tired of fighting this battle. Mm-hmm. So they did.
You left a kind of a legacy for integrating the
right.
department.
But since then, I don't know really what's happened. One of my principles is when you leave, you cut the cord. You don't try to hang on. And so I cut the cord.
A clean break.
Right. I've done that with other things too. I think it's only right that the people coming in pick up and develop their own programs in their way, and I've just seen too many people who haven't been able to give up and get very upset when there's a change, and although changes are going to come. So.
Helen, tell about some of the changes you saw in the hospital at large and in the community during your service.
I'm afraid I'm crowding up here with a bunch of stuff.
No,
here.
I think that's very important and very interesting.
Well, in the hospital, of course, it's expanded tremendously. It was a small hospital when I went there in 41, and but now it's got this tremendous research and all of these different, it's grown to I think it's one of the outstanding children's hospitals in the country. Now, in the community, this leads me to something else. Because in the community, after World War II, one of the things that happened was that the Welfare Planning Council got together a group of the Chamber of Commerce, various people, hospital people, etc., to develop a plan to try to coordinate services in this county, which was expanding so rapidly after World War II. And they got the money, at that time it seemed like a lot, $50,000, to do a survey of the hospital needs in this community. And they brought in an outstanding group, the Hamilton group. Were you here then, Elizabeth?
What year?
This was 47.
Before I came.
And they spent a whole year evaluating, looking ahead to the needs of this community as they could see this expanding population. And they developed a plan for the center core, and there were already all these hospitals in the center with Cedars, with Hollywood Breast, with Good Samaritan, California Hospital, all of them with well-established hospitals. But within a small area. And their idea was, in order to prevent further competition in developing programs, because every time you develop a program, you have to have all this expensive equipment, that they would have developed satellite hospitals around the county, in Lancaster, in the San Fernando Valley, etc., which would take care of the day-to-day problems and would send the major specialized problems into the hospitals that had been already developed and operating, so that they wouldn't have everybody competing for the patients and for the money for all this equipment and for all this building, etc. And it had been accepted. The county Board of Supervisors participated in that study too, because of course it involved the USC Medical Center, USC County Medical Center, and so forth. Well, it was $50,000 down the drain. Nobody paid any attention to it.
And you mean every little hospital was a rival for every kind of service from then on? The last,
20 years.
41
pretty well.
Yeah.
Right. And some of the hospitals, of course, have had to face reality that many of them have had to close their obstetrical units because there weren't that many patients. But gosh, the expense of this equipment, and yet every hospital has to have the newest and most expensive in order to get the patients.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just an overview of what's been going on.
Has this been one of the things probably that's made medical care so expensive?
It is. Well, there was an effort about 20 years ago to set up these democratically elected groups, that were going to screen the needs for the hospitals, but that didn't work either. That, I think, was sponsored from Washington. But anyway, what I see is this tremendous increase in costs without the hospitals ever agreeing to divide up the patients. So you've got people practically side by side.
Mm-hmm. And it's competition and rivalry in empire building.
Well, and it's that, but it's also, in order to survive, they've got to have the patients, so it's a survival kind of thing, too. Everybody has to say, look, we've got this marvelous equipment. This is maybe far-fetched, but that's the way I see what's been going on.
Coming back to your own career, Helen, what thing stands out to you as having been your most gratifying achievement?
Well, the thing that got me the most attention, of course, was that work I did with the doctors at the hospital on identifying physically injured children, and those are infants primarily, and trying to get some coordinated effort in the community to see what could be done to protect them. The article I wrote was rejected first by the Social Work Journal, then was sent on to, they did send it on to the Medical Social Work section, because at that point the journal was divided. Each division had its own opportunities, and they wanted to publish it. The problem was that the article was about coordinating all the resources, including the police, the district attorney, the juvenile courts, etc., into trying to work through the juvenile court to find a way of protecting children from further injuries and death. But the editors of social work were very upset, and they published the article then under the medical social work.
What was the basis of their upset?
This was a matter strictly for social work, and they had, the police and the legal authorities had no place in it. I'm not kidding, that was it. And they wrote that in an editorial that accompanied the journal in which it appeared. That it was this.
Was there a reaction from readers and letters?
I certainly did get reaction from readers. And then, as you know, probably, you may not know, but I went back to...
About when was that, Helen?
That was January of 1962. That the article came out, and that the week that the article came out, one of the doctors and I went back to a meeting at the U.S. Children's Bureau, and the Children's Bureau picked up on this, and they had on the mandatory reporting law, which was the basis for our getting the groups together to resolve this. So they started on a crusade to get the mandatory reporting laws throughout the U.S. At that point, I think I spent most of my time being interviewed on radio and TV. And
most of your working hours, you mean?
Well, it wasn't all during working hours. And
intruded on your private life as well.
Oh, did it ever? Craig insisted that he wasn't married to me, he was married to Children's Hospital. But one of the startling things was I got quoted on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, no less. I mean, this is just an example of how it was getting around. And anyway, of course, there have been a lot of changes since then, and rightfully, changes must come. But that was...
Well, what are some of the changes that you think are important?
Well, one of the things that troubles me a great deal is that, from my point of view, the identification of the physical injuries was a medical problem. And that was the point of where I started. When they began to include everybody under the sun in the reporting law, that the teacher and everybody who was thought there might be an inflicted injury was to report. I could never quite accept that it needed to be that widespread, and that it should be. In the end, it was going to have to be a medical identification anyway. The other part of that was that we worked very hard for years to get the Protective Services Law passed, which was to come in before, at the first implication of any problem, to get it to a social worker at that point, and to try to prevent it before it reached the point where there was.
And try to preserve the family.
And to try to preserve the family. Finally, I think it was, it was after Reagan was governor, a Republican assemblyman took hold of this, and we got the Protective Services Law passed. And then, the day it landed on Reagan's desk, we were all chewing our fingernails about whether he would sign it. It was touch and go, but fortunately, we'd gotten some advance notice that he would be hesitating on it, and so one of the members of the committee, whom I called, got busy, and anyway, Reagan did sign it, but there were so many handicaps added to that Protective Services bill, to the implementation, not the bill, but the implementation, to try to prevent it from being effective. The 90-day limit on service.
Were these administrative rules?
Administrative rules.
Coming out of the State Department.
Right. A 90-day limit. Well, a 90-day limit when you're trying to move into, it takes almost that long to get the trust of the family to do anything. So there was a really concerted effort, even though Reagan had signed the bill reluctantly, to get it implemented in any kind of effective way. But that was, and so that when a case would come to our attention that we couldn't document, that it was really abuse, medical abuse, and we tried to refer it to Protective Services, it was just like nothing at all.
They were interested only in medical abuse and physical injury.
Well, from the point of view of the hospital, that's where we were getting
but when you referred these cases out, they were not accepted.
They were not accepted. Well, or maybe they were accepted, but they were handled and closed almost immediately. This is one of the things that's been troubling to me, and it still troubles me because I don't know, you may know better than I know, because I haven't kept up at all, whether Protective Services is functioning at all.
Well, at one time it was the only service that remained, in the federal mandate. Foster care and Protective Services were all that remained in the way of child welfare service.
Well, that's one of the things that troubles me. Another thing that has troubled me is that originally, when we were reporting, the responsibility was the children were not returned to the family unless it could be demonstrated with some kind of assurance that the child would be safe from further injuries. Was it 4 years ago they completely overturned that? And now the child has to be returned unless it can be documented that the child would not be safe. Well, that's pretty hard to do. And that's another change.
Has there been any kind of plan for family treatment to accompany this? Or any support for family treatment?
That, I think, is the question. I think that's why right now you read in the newspapers that the children's services workers are threatening to quit because they can't possibly serve the patients. How can you give treatment if with the caseloads they have? You, I think, have kept up with that better than I have. That it's really
they're really mandated to serve these children at risk, but they can't do it.
That's right. They've never been able to do it. From the beginning, we said that the caseload should be under 30 per worker. They've never been under 60. I think now the last I knew they were over 100 per worker.
They're ballooning all the time.
And how on earth can anybody do anything effective with that kind of a caseload? Well, as I say, that change troubles me. I'm sure there are changes that are valuable. It bothered me when they insisted upon a review of the case every 3 months, and if their changes hadn't occurred, that the child would be referred for adoption within a limited period of time. Well, that puts a tremendous pressure on a social worker within 12 months to have made such dramatic changes that the child has to be placed for adoption. But all of this boils down to it costs money.
Mm-hmm. And the money is just not balanced.
And, well, we have this feeling of not wanting to give up anything ourselves to help others.
Helen, the staff at Children's Hospital, were they able to carry some of these on a sustaining basis, children at risk and their families, and carry on a program of family treatment?
No. We referred them to the Child Welfare Services.
The public agency.
The public agency. Under the
law.
Under the law. I think the one or two of the psychologists had bypassed the law and taken on some of the cases.
Your psychologist at Children's Hospital. Mm-hmm. And carried them over a period of time.
Yes, but I don't know what. But they were ignoring the mandatory reporting law.
What do you think that you learned from all this that you might advise social workers or social work administrators coming along?
I don't know at all. Out of this particular...
Well, the whole history of child abuse, because I think you are known as being one of the first to recognize and advocate for abused children.
Well, one of the things I was accused of was, because I was concerned about the children, of ignoring the family. However,
who accused you?
Well, the psychiatrist at Children's Hospital was one who said that this was all punitive to the parents, because I was concerned about, although it seemed to me it was punitive to the parents if you let them go on repeating these injuries until something more drastic happened, including we had too many of them that ended up dead with repeated injuries. But I deny that I was punitive to the parents, or that this was primarily unrelated to parents. And as you know, just before I retired, I went on the board of Parents Anonymous, and the whole focus of that organization, of which I was president for 2 years, and national president, was to try to help these parents to reach the point that they could resume their responsibilities, and really with a lot of success. But
we were just getting started on Parents Anonymous.
yes,
So
yes,
start at the beginning with it and tell me about your involvement with it.
Okay, before I leave that, I did want to say one more thing on working on abused children. One of the things I learned, was that all of the people involved, whether it was the police, the district attorney, the judges, they were all equally concerned and really came together. That was what the project was all about, was bring them together to look at and how do you solve a problem. That was an important lesson for me.
And to what extent do you think this actually happened, Helen?
Oh, I know it happened.
Everybody came together to solve it, despite the social work profession had taken a kind of an opposite stand, that it was the social work preserve, more or less. Uh-huh.
But the police, the district attorney, they all were feeling frustrated, and to find and when the judge of the juvenile court came in with this solution that you didn't have to prove who did it in order to protect the child, everybody sighed with relief. Actually, I think I developed more friends in the legal profession than in the social work profession out of this. And that is, I think some of that is reflected now in this group that's been meeting for many years now on child abuse, the Interagency Council on Child Abuse here.
Let's talk about that a little bit and then move on then to Parents Anonymous. Uh-huh.
Well, I don't really know much about that. Uh-huh. I just know it existed.
Are there some of the people that, judges and so on, that you remember as being very outstanding and successful advocates for children?
Well, the one that I knew best, of course, was Judge Odell, who was the head of the juvenile court when I met with us, and he kidded me even when he came to my retirement party with saying I was the most stubborn woman he'd ever met. I wouldn't give up until he'd arrived at some kind of solution.
And he was really praising you for being stubborn.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
great. Have to be stubborn
the I think this interagency council, Jean Matasinka, who's now a Superior Court judge, but who was with the district attorney for a number of years, I think was one of the people that picked up on this concept of the agencies getting together to resolve the problems and coordinate. So
how does the council operate? Actually?
I don't really know. I've never been in on it. But
it's more of an outgrowth of your work.
Well, I don't know that it is.
But it's really come into being more since your retirement.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Now, Parents Anonymous, the organization got started with Jolly Kay, who had been to innumerable agencies because of her treatment of her daughter. And finally got to a social worker, Leonard Lieber, who said to her, "Why don't you set up a group?" They came to me at that point and asked if I could refer, they called it Mothers Anonymous, if I could refer anybody, and I said, "Well, I can't refer anybody to you. They won't even admit that the child has injuries, let alone that they're involved." I was very wrong, but that was my impression. Anyway, they started with 2 or 3 mothers who got together, and
did they start actually at Children's Hospital?
No.
Uh-huh.
This was completely apart from us. But they'd been going for a short time and decided that they needed a board. They had 2 psychiatrists, and then they invited Jean Matasinka, the district attorney, and me, and 1 or 2 others to join the board, but it was a combined board of the mothers and the professional people. And they had started, by the time I joined, they had started a chapter at the women's prison with mothers there who'd been convicted. And it just took off. I don't know how
why
else to
had you
describe it.
supposed that they wouldn't come forward? Forward.
When you'd sit down and talk with them, although there were their reactions, see, when I would sit down with them, I would say to them, these are the doctor would have explained the injuries. Then I would say to them, now under the law, we are required to report these to law enforcement. And they would say, yes, I understand. And very often they'd say thank you. But then they would deny that there were any problems involved. They would say, well, this child fell out of the crib, even though it couldn't account for the injuries. There are all kinds of weird explanations. And sometimes they would deny that there were the injuries. And so I just didn't see how anybody was going to respond to it. Now, wouldn't you like to go and talk to somebody who also has these problems when they had said there weren't any problems? But it really was amazing the way Parents Anonymous caught fire. The next thing we knew, there was one of the mothers had gone to Texas from Redondo Beach, and so then there was an organization in Texas, and And then there was one turned up in Canada and Australia. All around, there were these chapters springing up all over. It was a tremendous kind of explosion, and it got a lot of publicity. And I don't know what else. It was, I was really astonished but pleased to be a part of it when it was something that was...
Tell about your term as the president of the national president.
Well, by that, up until the time I became national president, which I think was in 78, our board had been a local board, meeting...
you served continuously on the local board.
Right. By that time, we had gotten, I think it was in 75 or thereabouts, that we got the first grant from the government, federal grant.
Was that a children's bureau?
Well, it was under health and welfare. No, it wasn't under the Children's Bureau section. And, but we'd had these monthly meetings, because we were always in problems. Originally, when I first started going to these meetings, our problem was how could we get money for stamps to write to Australia and to write to Canada, and we didn't have a secretary, or poor Jolly was trying to answer letters out of her house, and it was terrible, struggling all the time for pennies. And she'd take up collections at the meetings from the parents, and then the federal government came through with a grant, and we added some board members from other places in the country. But we continued locally to meet once a month. Well, in the meantime, we kept trying to figure out how we could be a national board. If you're meeting every month and your board members are scattered all around the country, you're not a national board. So when I took office as president, I said, we're going to now be a national board, and we're going to try to meet twice a year instead of once a month. In the meantime, we had the money to develop a staff and other had secretarial help and so forth. And so that was the first thing I did, was to get a national board meeting twice a year with these people coming together from around the country, sitting down to look at our national problems. By that time, we had some chapters in Germany and England and various places, but we still stuck to being a national board in order to get federal money. And then one of the things I insisted on was a limitation on the period of time that people served, so we'd have a rotating board. And so that we limited the board presidency to 2 years. And
did you come up with Constitution and bylaws?
Oh yes, we had those from the beginning, from the time we incorporated, but we amended them.
It's the California Corporation.
Mm-hmm. So, 1980, I was saying I'm getting too old, but I finished out my term. Well, I didn't quite. I resigned a year ahead of time because, again, I think people should not cling. I might also add that some of the members of the board who'd been meeting once a month were unhappy when I said we were only going to meet twice a year, but they missed our camaraderie, I guess. But that's all I can tell you. Parents Anonymous is still going on. It has its problems.
What are the problems, you think, would you say?
Oh, dear. Well, I don't know how to word this tactfully. Well, this is another thing that upsets me, and that is when people compete for position or status and forget what it is their organization is focused on. Some of that happened with Parents Anonymous. Also, there was, this was after I left, but I just, as I say, I cut myself off, except that they named an award for me, but I think by which they hope to make money every year, but as a fundraiser. But the other thing that happened was that the National Committee for Child Abuse, which is in Chicago, and Parents Anonymous were considering uniting with, because in the meantime in each state they had their chapters, each organization, each was competing for funds. And the head of Parents Anonymous thought that the board had voted to join with the National Committee, but apparently it hadn't reached the total agreement that he thought it had, and it got publicized too soon and caused a lot of disruption. So I don't know. They're still two separate organizations, and PA now is the federal money, of course, had limits on time, and PA is now having to find its own money elsewhere, and the National Committee, I guess, is struggling to find its money, and so they didn't combine. I wrote an appeal that, for goodness sakes, let's think about what it is we're here to do and not scramble over who's going to do what. That is a real problem for social work, too.
These two organizations are?
No, I mean that problem, the scrambling.
Oh, scrambling for money for the funds, and rivalry.
And the rivalry.
Social worker against social worker.
Right.
Or
I use a children's hospital. It's this kind of thing that upsets me, and you can see it in bigger organizations too. But this is comparable to what I was talking about. A children's hospital, and a nurses group would become interested in what can we do to be of more service to patients. Or a physical therapist or occupational therapist. Then the social workers would come to me very upset. You know, they're getting into my territory. And this I absolutely could not tolerate. Because wherever the patient can get help, we want him to get help. And whoever can give it best, and I'm convinced that social work has a background and a commitment and a professional base that we can give certain kinds of service better than other people. But to compete over who's going to talk to this person about this little problem is, to me, it's ridiculous and unfortunate and does not help social work. Am I making myself?
Yes. I understand some person meaning.
But that was the same kind of thing that I was relating to these two organizations.
What's been the subsequent career of this young mother who has abused her daughter and got this started in the beginning? She's gone on to be quite a factor in the organization?
I'd like to turn that off. That's the sad part, because otherwise there's some great successes.
Tell me about the Helen Boardman Award.
Well, the PA needed to raise some money, and they decided they went together with the committee to give an award, and they put my name on it, and it's been given out 3 years now.
Who are some of the people who received the award?
Well, 2 doctors and the police officer who was in charge of the abuse program for the city police department, and G. Matasinka, who's now a judge, and Arlien Johnson, a psychiatrist, who's been very active in the sexual abuse. And anyway...
Is it a medallion or a plaque?
I have a plaque. Well, that was... I tried to keep them from doing that, but anyway.
Over your objections, they created
the
Helen Boardman Award.
Right, but I'm not...
It's a great honor.
No. Anything else here?
Well, maybe we could think about what the changes you've seen in practice.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about social work.
Between the time you entered the field and now.
Well, I told you a little in the beginning about... but the social work profession, when did you come to it? When did you come to L.A.?
I went to Chicago in 32.
No, but when did you come to L.A.?
I came to L.A. in 49.
49. So that was after, well, when I came down to L.A., see, up in the state of Washington, we had our Social Workers Association, but it wasn't split up into little divisions very much, because there weren't that many of us. But when I came down here, there was the Social Workers Association, and then there was the Medical Social Workers Association, and there was the Psychiatric Social Workers Association, and there was the School Social Workers Association. And then shortly after the people in private practice. And it was, some of us couldn't afford to belong to more than one, with the result that the Social Workers Association was meeting and the medical social workers were meeting, and very little interest. And also there was this competition, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of salaries and benefits and attracting people and so forth. So along about, I think it was, I don't know whether it was before you came or afterwards, the head of the Psychiatric Social Workers Association, whose name slips me, but she was a close friend of Heath from Pasadena, Esther Heath, had said, let's get together through the Welfare Planning Council. So we started meeting together, and finally we decided, this group of us, that this was all ridiculous, and so we decided to set up our own association. I don't think you were here yet, were you? Anyway, we set up an organization called the Social Workers Association of Los Angeles, and we were meeting, the whole group of us together, but we also ran into this competition with a small group of dissidents who insisted on being separate. We called ourselves Social Workers Association of Los Angeles, SWALA, and Chauncey Alexander was one of the people that was intimately involved. So we had our meetings, and we began to communicate with other people around the country, and I think we had a big part in the development of NESW, getting it started, because we were the first group here in Los Angeles to say, let's give up all this little separateness. We had our problems with the dissidents, but then that happened. We had other problems with dissidents. The other problem with dissidents that I remember that still has a bearing on, I think, what's going on today, although I haven't kept up with it, was along about when I came to L.A., we had an official recognition of registered social worker. We took an examination, you could be registered as a social worker.
This was state law.
Yes, but it was you weren't licensed, you were just registered. It identified you as having taken examination and passed. But we felt there should be something more that would be a little more definitive. So we set out with committees, a committee from the north in San Francisco and a committee from L.A. To try to work on a licensing bill. Now, in the meantime, there were chapters, social work chapters in San Diego and Long Beach and other places up the north, smaller chapters. We were, Los Angeles and San Francisco had the two big chapters. But so we started meeting, trying twice a year at least. They'd either come here or we'd go up there. to try to work on something we could agree on. Our problems at that point were many. One was we had this great influx of social workers who had been doing the job since the Depression years, but didn't have the educational background and requirements. But they were doing the job. And then we had the other group that said, oh, well, if you're going to have licensing, it has to be rigidly attached to the educational qualifications. Well, did we struggle? We struggled. And we'd meet and we'd think we'd resolved and find the compromises. And sometimes it would be two levels, social work 1, social work 2, this kind of thing. And then we'd come back to our various groups and we'd communicate with the other social workers around the state, and then we'd have to meet again because there were other problems arisen. Finally, we thought we had something that had been voted on by the social workers around the state, which was essential if we were going to the legislature. And we had a legislator all ready to introduce it. It was prepared, all set to go. When the dissidents rose up in wrath and sent telegrams to the legislator that they would oppose this bill, we struggled so hard with so long, and gave up because the legislature wouldn't go in if the social workers were going to fight each other.
What were the dissident positions?
That it had to be a master's degree or nothing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And your bill would have recognized other levels of
would have tried to give some recognition to
the working corps.
To the working corps.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still a struggle, I guess. Hasn't been resolved.
What do you think of the licensing as it is at present?
I really don't know much about it now.
The clinical licensing, that's state law now.
Well, I think it's a very good idea, and I'm all for it.
The recognition of the working corps has never been achieved, really, that your bill would have done.
I think some of that working corps has left.
It's really been superseded by a new generation.
Right. So I think that isn't, it was really critical.
It's no longer
as
critical as it was at that time.
Right. Do you think I'm right about that?
Well, I haven't given it that much thought, or haven't been that close to the issue, but I think that maybe getting graduate education, getting the degree has become more possible for more people.
Oh, yes. There are more schools. In 46 and 47, I think those were the times when we were struggling with this. There were only the 2 schools where people...
and as you say, they really weren't turning out that many.
No, they weren't turning out that many, and the jobs had to be filled.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a real problem, which I think is in the 40 years has changed markedly. There's one other thing on social work profession. Well, it's more than that. It's on the organizational structure of the community. When I came here in 1941, we had what was called the Welfare Federation, which had two functions. To raise the money for the agencies, and then part of the money that they raised also supported the Welfare Planning Council, which, do you remember that? Or, and it had a very important function in bringing together the agencies, trying to plan ahead for future needs for the agencies, and coordinating, and I thought it was a tremendous
It worked better than anything that supplanted it.
Well, I don't know what supplanted it, really.
It's just a vacuum now.
What happened at that point, as I understood it, was at the time when there was all this conservatism and looking under the bed for communists, and everything was suspect. And the powers that be in the Welfare Federation looked with suspicion on what the Welfare Planning Council was doing, which was dominated by social workers. They finally said, we aren't going to give you any more money. You'll have to raise the money for your functions by yourself.
They pulled the rug.
They pulled the rug, and became the United Way, which basically I think is function is money raising. I don't think they engage in a great deal of community organization, do they?
Not that I know of.
So I think that's a great loss.
You've seen the working process of community organization here kind of deteriorate over the years.
I guess yes. I guess that's right, with the failure of the Hamilton study on hospitals and the...
Well, you've seen accomplishments too.
Oh yes, I think social work has come a long way.
What do you think social work has accomplished as a profession?
Well, I think we have attained I think we've attained more security in our profession. I think we know who we are better. I think we know what we want to do better, what our goals are. I think with that, since we have more security in who we are and what our goals are, that we've gained more security in the community.
Know who social workers are and whose recognition. And finally, I'd like to ask you if you have any archives or documents that you would like to submit.
Well, the truth of the matter is, when I left, all the little books and pamphlets and things went down to USC.
They're already there.
Now, the thing that happened was, over a 3-year period, working some Saturdays and some Sundays, I cleaned out 31 years accumulation. Much of it were minutes of meetings, some of these meetings that I'm mentioning here, and I looked at them and thought nobody would ever look at them, and they went out into the incinerator, tons of but all the books and pamphlets and things that I had went down to SC.
You mentioned the Parents Anonymous book for which you were interviewed.
Yes.
Do you have that?
I don't know. This is the one in which
this is Hope for the Children.
Hope for the Children.
Hope for the Children.
A personal history of Parents Anonymous.
By Patty Wheat with Leonard Lieber.
Right. And it's about Parents Anonymous and
the history of Parents Anonymous.
Right. And there is
that Winston Press published in 1979. Mm-hmm.
This is something that I couldn't believe. I got a call. This was in 74, was it 72, 74, something. Oh, 70. I got a call saying, may we have permission to publish your article and to be used for young lawyers, and I said, oh, sure, go ahead. And here it came in a hardback.
This is your paper, A Project to Rescue Children from Inflicted Injuries, and it's reprinted from Social Work 1962.
Right.
And this book is Effective Utilization of Psychiatric Evidence.
I couldn't believe my eyes.
From the Practicing Law Institute in 1970.
18
Wonderful.
Years later to have
18 years later
to have
you're discovered.
No, not 18. No, 8.
8 years
8
later.
years later. 8 years later, I get into a hardback. That I never expected.
All right. I think that's a very appropriate and honorable ending.
Okay.
You're in a hardback.
Okay.
Okay, Ellen, thank you very much.